Hi, and welcome to another episode of Adventures in Local Marketing. I'm Christian, Head of Marketing at BrightLocal, and on today's episode we're talking all about reporting. Now, reporting might not seem like the most exciting topic, but when it comes down to it, reporting is something that nearly all of us have to do, whether it's reporting to a client, your manager, or stepping up in front of the entire business and presenting your results. Reporting is an integral part of being a marketer, and it's fair to say that many of us don't enjoy it. So ask yourself, how do you feel about reporting? Do you see it as a chore? Do you have that end of the month scramble where you frantically try to pull all your data together? And does reporting ultimately lead to more questions instead of providing answers? If you answered yes to any of the above, then this is the episode for you. My guest today, Dana DiTomaso, believes reporting doesn't have to be like this. Dana is president and partner of Kickpoint, a marketing agency that provides data and insights-led services for businesses across many verticals. And Dana is a regular speaker at some of the biggest conferences in SEO and digital marketing, where she often speaks about reporting, knowing full well that it remains a thorn in the side of many marketers. So in today's episode, we discussed why marketers have such a bad relationship with reporting, what you can do to change that relationship, and how you can learn to love reporting. So let's get to it. Okay, welcome Dana, and thank you for joining me on Adventures in Local Marketing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Really interested in the topic we're going to be covering today. So to kick things off, I wanted to ask you, as a marketer myself, why should I really care about reporting?
Well, I think the biggest issue that marketers run into with reporting is that they do the work. So they see the work that they're putting in, they see the results innately, but they don't necessarily know how to express those results to others. And it is very rare that you don't need to be beholden to someone else when it comes to the marketing that you're doing, whether it be a client or your boss. And I think a lot of marketers do themselves a disservice by providing reports that they understand, but other people don't understand, which means that in the end, they end up with a report that doesn't really show their true value or worth to the organization. And then as a result, they don't end up getting paid what they should. They don't end up continuing that client relationship. You know, I talk to a lot of marketers who say things like, "Oh, the client, they don't get what I'm doing," or they don't see the value in the work, and that's because we're doing a really bad job of expressing the value in the work. And sometimes the work that we do, like maybe we're on the wrong track, but at least the report would show that. So we can't hide behind bad reports either. And I think that that's one of the things that really got me into reporting in the first place, is clients saying, "I'm not really understanding the value of this work." And I would say originally, I think my first talk where I really talked about reporting was back in MozCon in 2014 or 2015. And that really raised a conversation. And I had tossed it out as a general idea that maybe our report should be better. And it turned out to be a huge thing that a lot of marketers sympathize with. So that ended up sort of changing the directory of where we took Kickpoint, the company, and focusing a lot more on reporting than we had in the past.
Okay, cool. So obviously, I was playing devil's advocate there. I'm a big believer in reporting, not just for myself, but also making sure my team feels like reporting is something that is for them, as well as being able to communicate their value. Do you think there's a kind of relationship that exists with most marketers and reporting? Is it viewed as a chore? Is it a love-hate relationship?
I think it's definitely viewed as a chore. I think a lot of it is because people spend hours and hours and hours putting together reports that are essentially screenshots ripped from different apps, and they make these huge reports. And I think a lot of this comes from fear. And certainly, I mean, early in my career, I certainly struggled with imposter syndrome. I'm pretty sure I'm past that now. I've been doing this long enough. I'm doing this for 20 years now. At some point, you just drop that and you're like, yes, I do know what I'm doing. But I think the big part of it is when you feel like you're insecure in your position or you're insecure in your role, you don't know where you sit with the client or your boss, you may feel that you rely on volume. And so if I present a 38-page report, obviously they're going to think I'm doing stuff. And one of the things that I really try to emphasize is that the volume of the report doesn't necessarily reflect the volume of your work. And ideally what you should be able to do is boil down what you're doing into just a few key metrics that are going to make sense to the end user. And that might be a 1-page report. It might be a 6-page report, but the report that you have for yourself, that dashboard that tells you if you're doing the stuff you should be doing, and the report that you give to others who aren't you should be really different and just focused on what's most important.
Yeah, so the chore is almost born out of the fact that there's no filter for what goes in. It's just volume game. And as a result, you're giving yourself so much work at the end of the month to basically communicate something that you're not really sure what you're communicating.
The other thing too that I find is that people also don't think about the report before they start on the work. So sometimes at the end of the month, it's this, oh crap, what am I going to report on? And then you suddenly are trying to pull stuff out of thin air, but analytics wasn't set up right in the first place. So you can't actually, like, your goals aren't set up, or you don't have the right events that you have to record user behavior. And so you're sort of making it up at the end, which can also result in a bad report because you're trying to hide the fact that you didn't actually have the metrics set up that you needed. So I find that that's the other problem too.
Yeah, so if people are stuck in this rut of feeling like reporting's a chore, what would your advice be to basically get them out of that rut?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to take a step back. Obviously, you're sort of in the muck right now. You have to step out of that and look at it objectively and figure out where you need to go. And one of the first things that we do with our clients, and that I've recommended to many, many other people to do with their clients or with their boss when they start a new job or have a new boss, is to do what we call a goal charter. And there's a blog post on our website talking about how to do goal charters. I talked about it at MozCon a couple of years ago, and last year as well, and a little tiny bit this year. So I think it's something, if you have the MozCon videos, watch that as well. And one of the things about a goal charter is where you start is with the goals of the organization. What are your goals, period? And one question we've actually started asking, which has been a really interesting one, is if I had a magic wand and waved it, what would you want 1 year from now? And that's been a really easy way for us to know, like, what is that one key goal that's important to you? Because often when you look at, say, business goals for the year, they've got, 20 key metrics. And that's a lot of goals to try to go towards. But out of this, what's the most important ones? And then from there, you can figure out how to turn that goal into strategies, strategy into tactics, tactics into KPIs, and then you have your report built. And then that at least tells you where you should start. And the goal charter needs to be done at the very, very start of a project or of your engagement, and should be revisited. But definitely do it at the very beginning, so then you can get all the reporting set up, and then you know what you need, and you can start to get a sense of where the barriers are going to be and who stakeholders you need to talk to and who you need to get on board. And then you can actually start doing the stuff you have to do, and then the report feels a lot easier when it's time for the reporting.
Yeah, I really like that. It's just one key objective, what you want to achieve, and then effectively reverse engineering it to basically build out your strategy, your activities, and your reporting to all keep communicating. This is where we're moving towards.
Yeah.
So what would be some examples that you've come across in terms of like that one goal?
Yeah, I would say definitely one client who approached us said, my major goal for the year is I want to launch my new website. It's like, okay, that's a to-do item. It isn't necessarily a goal. I mean, it's a goal in the sense that, yes, we need a new website. Your current website is horrible, but it doesn't really express the goal. And so then when we actually got into the website development project, at the beginning, we were doing all the planning steps that you do. And then we were able to tell, like, what are the current pain points of the existing website? Well, I want to have live quoting. Okay, so what do we think live quoting is going to get us, right? And so it was an easy way for us to start to see, all right, so you want to make sure that you have leads going up 20% year over year because you think that that's what live quoting is going to get you. And then, okay, so now we have a 20% year over year, and you want to focus on more SEO traffic. Okay, so now we know that we need to create these pages, and that is going to be the result of that. And also we're going to need to do some link building and some content creation, right? So then you can see how everything starts to go down to it. But then when it comes to the report is essentially year over year traffic from organic, and then conversion rate. Like, did you improve the conversion rate for the new website versus the old website? Did you increase the amount of organic traffic to the new website from the old website? And then it's just really two metrics that you have in your report that matter.
Beautiful. Imagine that, just two metrics you report. I think because digital marketers in particular are working across so many channels, and the omni-channel approach is obviously really key to probably hitting objectives. But there's this misconception that if you're doing something, you need a number attached to it, or you need to be communicating that we're measuring this. But I guess ultimately a report isn't just to show everything you're doing. It's about how you're moving forward towards that goal.
Yeah, and I think too, part of what comes out of the goal charter is knowing what you can't measure as well. And so you'll see this a lot with things like when you do offline advertising, which in local is still a hugely important channel. I am very pro offline advertising as long as it makes sense for value. And sometimes, so for example, we have a client of ours who's a pest control company in Australia, lawn bowling, huge in Australia. I think it's big in England as well. Not so much where I am in Canada. But one of the things that he's done is he has a seniors discount, and he's printed out seniors lawn bowl. And so he's printed out, he has an ad on the back of the scorecards that they use at the local lawn bowling club. So we put a tracking URL on that and a tracking phone number on that, right? And we know that not 100% of people who end up going with him are going to use that tracking URL or that tracking phone number. Some of them will just Google the brand name and then calling directly from Google My Business, or having a direct branded visit, for example, to the website. And in that case, we're just measuring, did traffic go up in general? When did we start distributing these cards? Let's measure it against this baseline if nothing else had happened. It's really this sort of effort lifts all boats idea. And so we find, for example, when people start running radio ads, even if you put a tracking URL or tracking number in the ad, people are still just going to Google you or go directly to your website without using the tracking URL, which means your direct traffic is going to go up. We know that's radio. So it's a matter of having solid measurement in place and understanding your baselines. So no matter what kind of advertising or marketing you're doing, it's having an impact. You may not be able to quantify it. And Rand Fishkin, for example, formerly of Moz, now SparkToro, just wrote a blog post talking about how frustrating it is because sometimes marketing initiatives get held up because you can't attribute it. And I think that that's where it's so important to set this early before you say, let's do podcast advertising, which I also really enjoy doing. Before you even get there, talk about goals and talk about how you're going to measure the success of everything and how establishing this baseline is so important, because not everything is going to be trackable. And I think it's important for people to accept that. Things like Safari, for example, and intelligent tracking prevention. Someone who comes to your site via Safari is going to be a brand new user every single day. This is why new users is a bad metric. Just explaining that to people before you start marketing, and then they can get a better grasp of the metrics and what makes sense and what doesn't for them, I think really helps to get that relationship to be so much stronger in the end.
Yeah, attribution. I mean, there could be a whole podcast on that alone. And I think it's something that probably plagues marketers in pretty much every vertical. I guess in local, it feels like it's potentially more of a problem. So if you're an e-commerce brand, all of your sales are going to be online. So even if you're just using Google Analytics, you should be able to get a good understanding of attribution. So which channels or marketing campaigns. But I guess with local, it's different because some of those sales or some of those conversions might be offline. So yes, there'll be form inquiries, there'll be calls, but what about footfall, people who go into store after seeing a marketing campaign? How do we actually get around that? Is that something that just has to be lived with?
So something that we do at the beginning of our engagement with clients when we're in the discovery period is we do a touch point inventory. And so we think about all the possible ways that someone could, let's say, get in touch with you or go into your store, or all the different ways that people are going to find out about you. And then we determine whether or not those are trackable. And if they're not, then we accept what percentage of your overall people coming to you are trackable, right? Because we have a sense of the baseline now. We know that X number of people call you. We know that X number of people fill out this form. We know that X number of people tap on an email link. We know that, X number of people just walk into the store. And so if we know, for example, that only 60% of your overall engagements are trackable, then that's a baseline we're accepting in the report, is saying we know that we're only going to be able to track 60% of this stuff. So when we're thinking about, say, your overall ROI when it comes to the marketing spend, then we know that really we're only attributing 60% of this. So if we say, for example, well, we ran Google ads and we made you $1,000, but we know that that $1,000 is only 60% of the overall value that you saw, because some of it just is not trackable. And I think that that's a really valuable way to present it to a client and say, look, here are the gaps, and we know we're not going to be able to track these things, and that's okay. It's also a really good way to get call tracking set up, which I'm a huge fan of. We use CallRail for all of our call tracking needs. They're wonderful. We've worked with them for years. They're not paying me to say this. I just really like them. And being able to put CallRail numbers on Google My Business, for example, that is enormous for a business who has had no idea up to this date exactly how many phone calls they've been getting from Google My Business. We have a client who's a construction company across Canada, and they just put CallRail numbers on all of their Google My Business listings. And they, in the last 2 weeks, have gotten hundreds and hundreds of phone calls to the Google My Business. And it's shocking. I mean, now it's being reported in Google Analytics, so their organic looks spectacular, but that's because it's all these new CallRail calls. But they had no idea before. They knew that they got phone calls to their different branches, but they didn't know it was from Google My Business. And just being able to demonstrate something like that completely changes how they think about marketing, because they're like, okay, Google My Business is huge. How do we rank better? And now we can start to make better decisions on where to spend our time. Because if you haven't even tried doing any Google My Business work and you're already getting hundreds of phone calls, just imagine what would happen if we actually worked for it. And I think that that is really good for a client to be able to distill down their marketing strategy and point at something and say, here's our opportunity, let's go for it.
Yeah, I think client education is a big thing within local. Do you find that you might be dealing with clients who aren't the most technical savvy, and that actually a lot of the time, reports are there to educate as much as inform what impacts happened?
Definitely. I mean, I think in local, there's definitely two types of people that we work with, which is the owner directly of the business, or we work with an in-house marketing team for large organizations that have multiple locations. Either way, those people don't have time to keep up on everything. Every little twitch of the internet is not their job, it's our job. So part of what we have to do is make sure to distill down, like, this is something you need to worry about or not. Google has done this thing. Google now has LSAs for personal injury lawyers. Let the games begin. This is going to be really weird. So it's important to let the client know that stuff, but also let them know what they actually have to pay attention to and what they don't. Because, reading every single blog post put out by, say, Sterling Sky isn't necessarily the best use of an owner's time. But explaining to them what the Google My Business metrics actually mean, if they like going in that dashboard, that's a good use of time, for example. And I think that that's where we can really help out a client, is sort of pointing them and saying, no, don't ignore all that. That's all just no noise. Look over here instead. And this is the important stuff. And a lot of our engagements also focus on teaching and training, which I find that in local, like, people have started their business because they like what they do. And marketing isn't necessarily what comes to them. So they're usually very talented, physiotherapists, chiropractors, personal injury lawyers, right? They know that local marketing is important. It isn't what makes them get up in the morning. What they do is what makes them get up in the morning. So I think by showing your own passion for this role, they can really respect that. And then they can trust your expertise, which helps make the relationship move along a lot faster too.
Okay, great. I think we could go down a big rabbit hole on reporting. There's so many things we could talk about. I'm going to rewind it a bit and learn a bit more about you. So obviously you're very experienced and passionate about reporting. How did this come about? Was it something you were naturally drawn to at a point in your career?
Yeah, so I originally started doing websites back in 2000 on Dreamweaver, which we all may recall if you've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And my very, very first client, when I launched her website, she said to me, I'm not on Google yet. Why? I said, I don't know. I will get back to you. And I found Rand's blog, which wasn't SEO Moz yet. It was before that. I can't remember the name of the organization. And I was like, oh, SEO. Okay, I'd never heard of this before. And then that is the pit that I fell into, was the SEO pit. It turns out that I really like SEO. I do not enjoy website design. I mean, we do web design at Kickpoint, but I don't do it. It's not my jam. The marketing side is what I do. And I find that at the beginning was just showing, how many people are coming to your site from organic, what keywords, which you could get back then, are they using? Does it make the most sense? And over time, as reporting has gotten, reporting was actually a lot easier in the beginning because everything was more trackable. And now, as ad blockers exist and essentially marketers have ruined the internet, which is why people do things like ad blockers and have ITP and all the other attribution challenges that we have, reporting has actually gotten more difficult, which I think behooves us to do better reporting so that we can actually show the value of initiatives, and not just show the value and say, yes, everything we're doing is great. You should definitely rubber stamp everything that we do. But also, here's the ways in which, we tried something and it didn't work, or you're blowing money on this and you shouldn't be, or we find that this one section of the site is a black hole where good leads go to die. We should really fix that. And I think that that's where, even, for example, like saying, hey, look, we've been trying Google ads on this thing, it isn't working, what else can we do? I think it's important to be able to have a report that lets you admit that as well, as much as it might be, a little nerve-wracking to say, yeah, we suck. It's just this one thing that you're doing that isn't working. And I think it's okay to admit that. And I think a good report is going to show the good and the bad, instead of just being all puppies and rose petals all the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, reporting, you're almost afraid to say that things aren't working. Would you say that marketers just really need to detach themselves from that mindset? It's kind of in our nature as marketers, we want to show our value constantly.
Yeah, I mean, marketers are good at marketing, right? And that includes marketing ourselves. I think that's part of it. And I also think that part of it is because we're not making something, like we're not producing a physical product at the end of this. You do if you work in, say, branding and you have a whole identity system and business cards and physical bits you can touch and hold, or you're the website, you're like, it is done. I have made the website, and that's great. But with marketing, it's just we did stuff, things happened or didn't happen, and it feels very nebulous. And I think it's something for sure that I personally struggle with is just the nebulousness of our industry and how you can't touch it or feel it. And it's when I first started out of university, I actually was working in ecosystem restoration, which is very hands-on. You do things, you see stuff, the ecosystem is restored, ta-da! And marketing feels so much more, vague compared to that, which is funny, as I don't know how this ended up being the passion of my life, was getting into marketing after ecosystem restoration. But I think that's certainly a struggle, is thinking about, how can I show actual value of the stuff that I'm doing, instead of just like marketing happened and maybe you got more money or maybe you didn't. And I think that's where a lot of like my dedication to reporting comes from, is being able to show the actual hard results of the work you've been putting in. There's nothing more rewarding than, say, doing a technical audit of a website. The client actually implements the recommendations, which I know doesn't always happen all the time, but they implement it, and then magically there's more traffic. Ta-da! Nothing else has happened. I'd say one of the most rewarding things that I saw in reporting, this is where it's really important to have goals set up in advance. We'd worked with a client for a few years. We tried everything we could to get their website better. Someone else had developed it and we inherited it. And then we said, you know what, your server really sucks. Why don't we just move you to a new hosting service? And we did. And then I think it was the next day, their conversion rate went up by something like 20%. And we did nothing else. It was just because people weren't bailing anymore. And it's just little stuff like that. You're like, yes, okay, that's what gets rid of imposter syndrome, by the way. It's just knowing that that's the thing you have to do. It's a small thing that you do that has an enormous outsized impact. And I think that's where having good reports set up in advance that know what the conversion rate is and are able to point and say, yes, the one thing we did had this enormous impact. That's what a really good report will do for you.
So what are the biggest lessons you've learned in your career when it comes to reporting?
I think the biggest one is just to make the reports small and stop using tables. We all love Excel, right? Excel is a marketer's best friend, or I guess Google Sheets now. And we love tables, but tables are not for everyone. And I think making sure that your stuff is visual is really important. Being able to respect other people's ability to read and understand and what makes sense for them is really important. And some people just want to have a dashboard that they can go in and change the dates and futz around with it, and they're very involved in that way. And other people just want something where you sit down with them once a month and don't do a 2-hour meeting, like just like 15 minutes to go over the report and be like, yes, things are good, great. And other clients too, we ask them, what is going to make you, or makes you happy? What's that magic wand thing? And one client said to us, I just want the phone to ring all the time. Great. That's what we did. And so it actually says in their report, did your phone ring? And then that's the call rail numbers, because that's their phone ringing. And it's something like that, is just really respecting the client's point of view and what matters to them, instead of trying to fit them into a templated box. And I think that that's something as well, like as an agency, obviously you work with lots of different clients. You probably have a reporting template, and reporting templates are great as a starting point, but they can be really dangerous as something that you apply wholesale to everybody. Make sure to customize it for that client, change the language, change what you actually include. Clients, if traffic growth isn't a goal for a client, don't include sessions by channel. Instead, focus on, say, conversions as the first thing you report on. And I think that's the kind of thing that makes that client feel like you're doing something for them, makes them feel important and respected, as opposed to just like yet another number in your balance sheet.
Yeah, it's also coming at it with some empathy for the end client, where it's just not bombarding them and overwhelming them with things that they've never set out to achieve. They just want to know, we agreed on this is what we wanted to achieve. So show me that, tell me the story, be honest if things aren't working, yes, but, use my time as effectively as possible. Tell me a bit about your agency, Kickpoint. Is reporting a big thing that you position around, or is it just a piece of the puzzle that really just ties everything together?
I think that if one of the things we start with is discovery. And I actually just talked about this in MozCon quite a bit. I need to turn it into a blog post. But discovery does start with reporting as an end goal. I think certainly as an agency, we have a big focus on reporting, but people approach us for all different reasons. You know, they would have read our blog post on Google Ads Express and why it sucks, or Google AdWords Express is what it used to be called. And then they're like, please fix up my ads, they're horrible. And then we get into reporting from there, you know, so, or they need a new website, and then we get into reporting from there. Reporting is baked into everything, but it isn't necessarily the main reason why people approach us. And I think it's a matter of, as a team, everybody on the team has a good understanding of what's going to make a good client engagement, and therefore is able to position, you know, everything the way that it should be for a client. And we also are, honestly, part of it is also being picky and being really, you know, rigorous when you are getting leads and talking to new clients. And obviously this is a luxury. We've been around for a while now. We're going to be 8 years in September. You know, you get good leads and you can be picky as to who you're going to work with, and filter out the bad leads. And if you're just starting out, you don't have that luxury. And certainly early in my career, like, you had to take everybody you could so you could pay the bills. So this is a luxury that if you hang in there, you'll get there. If you're early on and listening, like, don't panic. One day you too can pick. But I think it's important to ask the questions of the clients that are important to you as an agency, you know, making sure that you really have that agency, I don't know if culture is the right word for it, but more personality fit. You know, like a poor client for us is someone who just wants a vendor and they just want to throw money into a marketing machine and have marketing come out the other end and not really understand how it's made. It's not a good client fit for us. We know exactly where to send them because there are agencies who do that, and they're also great at what they do, but we prefer to work with clients who are super hands-on and want to learn. And ideally, some of our best engagements are with in-house teams where eventually they don't need us anymore because they know what they're doing and they can just call us if they need strategic advice, but they have an in-house team that's trained up and they can do the stuff that they need to do. So I think really deciding for yourself as an agency, like, what's important for us and what makes our best clients as an agency, and what makes your best clients is not going to be the same as what makes our best clients, which is great because that means that there's lots of work to go around for everybody. You don't have to compete with people. And then really focus on what your thing is. And for us, that's reporting. You know, that's one of the things that we really try to do well for our clients is reporting. There's other stuff too, but I would say, like, the thing that I am personally most involved in is good reporting.
Awesome. So what would be the best fit client for you based on what they actually want to achieve? Are there things that are slight alarm bells when you start off a conversation, or are there things that are just like, yes, this is a client we definitely want to work with?
Yeah, I actually had someone just on Monday, actually, who was a total alarm bell. So we sent out a survey when we asked people to book a call with us. And one of the questions that we ask is that magic wand. You know, if I waved a magic wand, what would you want a year from now? And this person said, I want to double my traffic. And we looked at their stuff and they have like really bad reviews. They are in a super competitive market. It's kind of generic. Everything else, it's like, you have so much work to do before you can double your traffic. This isn't, you know, where we really want to go. And it's like, you talk to them, you're like, we don't recommend this because of these things. And then if they come back and they're like, I still want to double my traffic. It's like, okay, it's not going to be a good fit for us. We know that, 6 months from now, you're going to be unhappy and we're going to be unhappy. So let's just cut our losses right now and recommend you to another agency who I think is going to be a better fit for you. And I think that that's an important thing, is just not to spin your wheels with clients who are not a good fit. And that can mean sometimes too that you end a relationship with a client after they've signed. And again, like, that's okay too. That's going to happen.
Are you naturally a numbers person, a very analytical person?
That's a good question. I think I am. It's funny because I didn't do great in math in school, but I did great in stats. So I had to take calculus 3 times before I passed it, but I didn't get calculus until I was actually in geography. So this is leading to my career as ecosystem restoration, my brief career. And we had to use calculus to figure out how much dirt was going to be in a hill once we moved it. Like, oh, it suddenly makes sense. And up until that point, it had been very theoretical and I didn't get it. And same thing when it came to stats. I did a stats class at university, stats for geographers. And like, oh, actually, I really like this stuff. And I think that's where I started to realize that it was actually the stat side of math that did it for me, not the other theoretical side of math, which is how it'd been presented really up until that point. And that's when I started getting into analytics and analysis. I find what I really like, I think the thing that I like the best when working with analytics programs is also helping people understand which metrics are trash and what they're actually measuring. So things like users versus new users, completely meaningless unless you're forcing people to log into your website. Things like time on site. Google isn't measuring that unless someone goes to a second page on your website. And these are things that are caked into Google Analytics, have been around since it was Urchin, way back in ye olden days of analytics. And I think a lot of people know truly what those metrics mean. So that's also nice to be able to say to someone, I know you've been focusing on time on site, but it's not measuring what you think it is. This is actually an important metric for you. Let's get this right. And that's where something like content consumption, for example, which is a Google Tag Manager recipe we have that helps people measure if people are really reading their content. That's where that came out of, is us explaining to clients that time on site is trash. What can we do that's better? And here's a Google Tag Manager recipe that'll help you with that.
I think it probably is reassuring for listeners out there to know that you aren't some sort of super math genius.
I am so bad at math. I don't know how popular cribbage is in the UK as a card game. I know we play it a lot in Canada, and my wife has to add up my cards a lot of the time because I'm not fast enough at math. So no, I am very poor at day-to-day math, if that makes people feel better. But stats, yeah, on it.
Awesome. So what advice would you give to a marketer who feels a bit intimidated by reporting or dealing with spreadsheets or trying to communicate their value with numbers effectively?
Yeah, one of the things that I often say is if you're able to, if you're working at it with a big organization, you might not be able to do this, but with a smaller company, sometimes what you can do is you can set up Google Tag Manager, and there's lots of tutorials on how to do that, and then have the data go to two Google Analytics properties, the main one that you won't touch yet, and then a secondary one, which I always call the sandbox, but you can call it whatever you want. And that's the one where you're going to experiment and tweak and try things. And that's where you can really do things like add a goal. How does it affect your bounce rate? If you push events over to the sample Google Analytics profile, like how is that changing the reporting that you get? And that can really give you a good understanding of what inputs affect the outputs of the marketing that you get. Because in true statistics, you should always work with the raw data. But the problem with Google Analytics is that we're never working with the raw data. You can only do that if you do, say, a log file analysis, which I remember doing before Urchin Analytics came out, and actually it's back in vogue again. It's doing log file analysis. It was funny when I did it again. I'm like, oh, right, I remember this from, say, 2003. And I think that that's where doing those kinds of analyses can really help you get a better understanding of inputs and outputs and how that affects the final product in terms of the numbers and the data that you're going to get. Something as well is just trying stuff. So for example, one of the things that we've done for our clients is if they have offline sales, so somebody fills out a form, goes into Salesforce, there's a salesperson who takes it on, they buy the thing, great. That value wouldn't by default make it into Google Analytics because it is an e-commerce transaction. So one of the things that we've done is married Google Analytics with the client CRM so that when that product is sold, then it pushes back into Google Analytics as the value of the sale. And then you can actually, like it's e-commerce, and then you can attribute that actual value to that person coming to the website originally, that original visit. And it's been really, I'd say, life-changing for a lot of our clients who've had this implemented because it shows them not just percentage of form fills, but percentage of form fills that actually turned into money. But the first time I did that, it was with the sandbox property. I was testing out a whole bunch of different ways to do it. I couldn't get it to work. And then I saw it show up and I felt like a wizard. So you too will feel like a wizard if you try to have a sandbox property and you try to do things in it. And it does make you feel like, oh, actually, I do get this after all.
Have there been any tools that have been game changing for you when it comes to reporting?
I would say Google Tag Manager for sure, because there's so much you can do with Google Tag Manager to help your reporting, especially when it comes to things like user behaviors. Something as simple as being able to record how far down the page someone scrolled. We usually record that as a custom metric. And being able to say, you had X number of page views, but X number of those page views only, the people got 50% of the way down the page most of the time, for example, or being able to fire an event when a really important CTA is visible to the user, for example. I think that those things are really important to learn. And it's funny because I avoided Google Tag Manager for a long time. I was like, this seems complicated and hard. I don't know if I want to get into it. And then I remember saying to my business partner, Jen, one day, I'm like, I think I'm finally going to have to learn Google Tag Manager. This is it. I'm just going to have to suck it up and do it. And I think that was about 5 years ago. And then I just decided to fully immerse myself into Google Tag Manager like it was a university course. And now I would consider myself to be a Google Tag Manager expert. And so that was, but I would say learning Google Tag Manager definitely revolutionized how we do reporting because of all the additional behaviors and metrics and everything else you can report on. And Google Tag Manager is the method to get you there. So if you're not strong at Google Tag Manager, I would say start learning. One website, Simo Ahava is the wizard of Google Tag Manager. Like, he knows everything about his product inside out, and he's also very giving of his time. He releases free stuff all the time. So if you're not following Simo's blog, at first it's going to seem like some sort of other language, but eventually it will make sense to you. And I think this is where, for me at least, diving into the deep end and just playing with this stuff and seeing what it does and how it affects things really helped me get to where I am now.
One of the things I always notice when it comes to reporting, especially if you're reporting up into, say, the CEO, is they'll ask you why a lot. And it's a really hard question a lot of the time, because that's always hard to actually uncover, I think, as a marketer in general, because effectively you're trying to measure why people are behaving in a certain way. And a lot of the things we have don't really tell us that. How often do you come across the why, and is there a way around it, or is there a way to bake it into your reporting so you can get ahead of those questions?
Yeah, I think asking yourself why a lot of the time is good. Like the like you're a 3-year-old and you know how they constantly ask why all the time. Do that of yourself. And I think a lot of the why questions come from a place of not understanding and truly wanting to understand. It isn't confrontational. It's them saying, why is this happening? What can I do to fix it? Like, why are people doing this? And then, maybe Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager, it could help you with user behavior metrics, but then maybe you need to turn to something like Hotjar, or if you have the budget, Full Story. I would say Full Story is probably one of the best true user recording softwares out there, but it is not cheap. It is very expensive. So it's really only, I think, for large organizations. For those of us who can't afford something like Full Story, Hotjar seems like a good alternative. And really just sitting there and watching people use your site can make a big difference in terms of understanding what the heck are people doing? Where are they struggling? And also, and it's funny because I tweeted this out a couple of weeks ago, use your website on a mobile device. We sit in front of these great big screens all day. I'm in front of 2 enormous monitors right now. And you really have to force yourself to use your website on a mobile device, but use it on a mobile device and not just, emulating it in Google Chrome with the certain screen size and everything else showing up. Physically go outside in a bright day and try to look at your website and see if you can actually use it. Mimic the true conditions that someone would be using the website and see if it's a struggle. And I think that that's where it's something that can really help you figure out, like, this is where people are falling down. I remember one time with a website, one of the things that the client didn't realize until we did some Full Story recordings for them was that they had 2 CTAs that were overriding each other on certain sizes of phones. And so what ended up happening was that people were clicking one, meaning to click the other, and then getting frustrated and closing the site entirely. Or another situation where people were buying tickets, back when you could go to events, they were buying tickets to go to a symphony, and there was a Facebook sign-in for the tickets. But then if you hadn't already signed up for Facebook, if that was your first time using Facebook, what would happen, there was an error in the code that would then dump out that person's cart when they signed up to use Facebook to check out, which was really frustrating. And they didn't know why they had so many cart abandons. And it was this code error. And we only saw that by watching people actually use the website using Full Story. So those kinds of things, analytics can get you so far, but sometimes you just got to watch people really struggle with your website and figure out where the problems are.
Yeah, I really like the idea of going back and actually looking at what people do, because I guess ultimately reporting is reporting what people have done. There's a number, but that's a person. And I think some of the way that metrics are referred to dehumanizes that in effect. So we use sessions, we use conversions, we use users. And it's like, no, these are people, they've done something. So actually taking a step back and going, well, if these numbers aren't going in the direction we want, but obviously people aren't doing what we hope they would do, and then actually starting to do that. So with that in mind, do you use any techniques to help understand why people are behaving in a certain way? Do you do any user testing?
Yep, definitely. When we're doing website development, there is certainly an element of that. And part of it too is actually talking to their customers as well and finding out how they have engaged with the company in the past. And ideally too, sometimes we try to ask people, like if it's say an organization, we're working with a chamber of commerce and we wanted to talk to organizations who'd actually left the chamber and why they left, for example. So then you can get into stuff that isn't even related to websites, but is important, say customer service issues. One client who's an apartment complex, we found out that all the bad reviews at one complex were basically all around this one single person. Obviously not our problem, it's an HR problem, but telling the client about it and being like, here's an issue that we found, have fun dealing with it. It's just that you have to do that kind of stuff. And I think that that's something really important too, is just really getting into the human factors behind that data is key. And you mentioned too about how stats can dehumanize people and sessions and users and stuff. I always try, I don't 100% succeed, but I do always try, instead of calling people users, I try to call them visitors or searchers or whatever is the appropriate, context for what it is that that person is doing. And I think that that's something really important to think about as well, is what is the right language you can use to be able to communicate, who these people are, because it isn't just numbers on a page. There are actually real people, thousands of them, visiting your website displeased. I mean, in what other industry can we possibly get away with saying, 95% of the people who do this don't want to do this? If you have a 5% conversion rate, that means that 95% of people have said no thank you. Like, that's, in most industries that would be bad. In our industry, we're like, wow, 5%, that's great. So what can you do to be better?
So say I'm a marketer who has a full-on hate relationship with reporting. What would you say to me to try and convince me that it's something I should be loving a bit more?
I would first ask by how you make decisions. And I also think too, sometimes you just don't bother dying on this hill as well, especially if it's a colleague and they just hate reporting and you ask them why and they're like, reporting doesn't, it sucks, or it doesn't mean anything, and sometimes you can get into maybe they've had some sort of past situation where the reporting did not actually match up with reality. It was poor reporting. So really explaining to them how reporting can be more accurate, or explaining where reporting is not accurate and where they can ignore it, instead of coming in and saying, but reporting can track everything, which isn't actually true. Just be honest about what you can and you can't track. And I think that that would help as well. I remember one year after MozCon, I had someone come up to me and ask me a question saying that, our boss makes us Google our brand every 10 minutes, and they were in a call center or something like that, and report back on what the ranking is. How can we stop him from doing this? And you need to walk that back and figure out why he's asking of this. Why have you become rank tracking software for your CEO? This doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that that's where it's just again, asking yourself that why. What has happened? What past trauma has this person experienced that has resulted in them not trusting or believing or being willing to be open to the possibility that reporting can help you do a better job? And sometimes too, it's just that person's stubborn, and then you can just walk away too.
Yeah, it's almost like the polar opposite of probably how most people think about reporting, which is something to be done at the end of the month, maybe scrabbling together last minute because it's got to go out to a client, or you've got to share it with your boss or do a presentation. And then that's the opposite, where it's not detaching yourself from a metric and just obsessing over it and probably getting in the way of doing what you need to do. Is there a happy balance that marketers need to find?
I think the earlier you can get reporting set up, the better your position you're going to be in, because that end of month scramble sucks. Nobody enjoys that. I mean, I am a serial procrastinator and I hate it. And one of the things that has made me better is by having all this stuff set up as early as possible. And that day you set up the report, it's funny because when we do an analytics project for a client, we'll set up their dashboards and everything is new because we just, went live with their new analytics configuration the day before. And here's your dashboard. And then I say to them, this link exists, but I don't want you to look at it for 2 weeks, because it's not going to have all the data that you want, because it has quite literally 1 day of correct data in it at this point. So that's part of the process, is just setting it up and then telling them, we're going to look at the reports to make sure we're still getting what we want. This is where testing in advance when it comes to analytics configurations is really important. But the reality is, when you set that up at the beginning, you're not going to get anything useful for a bit. So don't get the client all hot to trot to go in there every single day and look at how their data is doing, because it's going to look really weird. This can happen too, for example, when you add new goals, suddenly the conversion rate looks really great. Well, yeah, because you added a new goal and now you suddenly have a higher number of conversions because you were tracking something that you weren't tracking before. So that's part of it too, is don't hide behind, you manipulating the data to make yourself look good. That's another trap you can fall into as well. And I think that that's where you can really start to get unethical territory.
So we ask 2 consistent questions of each of our guests. The first one is, what one skill would you recommend a local marketer should be honing to help them further their career over the next 1 to 2 years?
I would say learn how to talk to people. Something that, so in addition to the speaking engagements that I do, I also have done a weekly radio column for CBC, which is like the BBC in Canada, and I talk about technology. And I have done this column every week for the last 9 years. And doing a 5-minute column every week for 9 years gets you really good at talking without saying a lot of ums, ahs, stalling, and really teaches you to speak with confidence. And I think that if that is something that you feel you struggle with, learn how to speak well, slowly, and which I still struggle with for sure, and with confidence. And I think that that is really going to help you in how you present your ideas, because the idea is one thing, how you present it is another thing. And sometimes, unfortunately, how you present it can override the actual idea itself. So really get better at presenting those ideas so that you can get stuff done that you want to get done.
Brilliant. I guess reporting is the starting point for having a conversation, right? So focusing on getting that conversation better seems like a good way to actually do reporting better then.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if you're confident in your speaking, you're confident in how you present, and people read that confidence, and that results in people saying yes to what you want them to do.
Awesome. And so the final question I have for you is, what advice would you give to someone entering local marketing today?
I think learn who the good sources are of information and who the bad sources are, and make sure you're paying attention to the right sources. I think that that's where it's just pick a few blogs that you know that you trust, a few newsletters that you trust, and just stick with those. So for example, like the BrightLocal blog is a good source of local marketing information. I also really like Sterling Sky. Joy and her team are right at the cutting edge of local SEO. I 100% trust them to make the right call when it comes to new information or new advice. Other places like Local U, for example, and that can really help you get into local SEO, is just paying attention to the right sources and really keeping up.
Brilliant. So learn from the right people. I think that's good advice for anybody, no matter what point they are in their career. There's a lot of people out there who have probably blown out a lot of hot air, and it becomes distracting. Well, and also thanks for the BrightLocal shout out. I'm sure the content team will be very happy to hear that. Thank you so much, Dana. It's been great chatting with you. And I'm actually feeling really inspired about looking at our reporting now and basically saying, are we doing too much? Are we having the right conversations off the back of it? You've inspired me to go away and do this better. So thank you for that as well.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Dana for such an interesting conversation. It's fair to say this episode got me thinking about not only how I do reporting, but the role it plays in my job and in my career. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation too. And if you have time, I'd love to hear your feedback, either about this episode or about adventures in local marketing in general. So if you have a spare minute, I'd really appreciate it if you could head to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. This feedback will help us improve what we do here, and it will also help us get in front of more local marketers. So thanks in advance if you do leave a review. And that's it for today. I'll catch you again very soon.